Good morning everyone. Tara, basa na tayo ng ating libro guys. Kapag Filipino, magbasa na tayo nating sariling history book. History of the Filipino People by Agoncillo and Guerrero. Today is Thursday, April 2023. History of the Filipino People, Part 6. The Third Republic, Topic number 29. The Cultural and Social Scene. Nandito tayo sa paragraph, Filipino Literature in English. Basa. Filipino Literature in English. Filipino writing since independence has acquired a distinction that even foreign writers like Wallace, Stegner, and Hortense, Calisher have noted. As in the preceding epochs, the American colonial and the Commonwealth, the Filipino writers in English have been more interested in poetry and the short story than in the novel and the drama. Although in these latter times a few have tried their hand and succeeded creditably within the limitations of language, a few of the pre-war writers continue to write as though age has not made them stale. Some such writers are Bienvenido and Santos. Ang kapangalan pa ng teacher ko sa programming. Some writers are Bienvenido and Santos, who put out his The Wounded Stag Brother, My Brother, You Lovely People stories. The late poet Amador T. Daggio, who was almost consumed by the flaming Alay Rivers and B.M. Gonzalez, whose prolific pen produced Seven Hills Away stories, A Season of Grace novel, Children of the Ash-Covered Loam, and other stories, Bamboo Dancers novel, and Lucky Strangers. On this island, now Juan Silaya, who wrote this barangay novel, Jose Garcia Villa, who sent the world Volume 2 verse, and selected poems, and New Severino Montano, famed for his arena theater, who published 3 one-act plays, Wilfredo Maria Guerrero, who has produced 13 plays, 8 others plays, 7 plays, etc. Ano ba ibig sabihin ng MA period? Di ba Maria yan? Or basta basahin ko na lang guys ha. Who published 3 one-act plays, Wilfredo Guerrero, period Guerrero. Inaano ko kasi as Maria, binasa ko kasi as Maria. Wilfredo period Guerrero, who has produced 13 plays, 8 others plays, 7 plays, etc. Parang ganyan din yung sa ano natin apelyido dito sa Milagros si Guerrero naman siya. Familiar, famous din yung Guerrero nung araw. Yung mga apelyido na Guerrero. Who has produced 13 plays, 8 others plays, 7 plays, etc. Among the post-independence writers who have produced enough significant pieces to entitle them to a place in the history of Filipino literature in English are Nico Ken, whose prose and poems, and the woman who had 2 novels, though much admired and talked about as a matter of fashion, have not sold 1,000 copies, Edelberto Quechempo, who has written 2 novels, What's in the Night and More Than Conquerors, Esteban Americanized Esteban Haveliana, whose novel Without Seeing the Dawn. Guys, magbasa rin kayo ng inyong sariling libro guys ha. History Book of the Filipino People. Para alam niyo yung binabasa ko dito. Okay, ulitin ko. Edelberto Quechempo, who has written 2 novels, What's in the Night and More Than Conquerors, Esteban Americanized Esteban Haveliana, whose novel Without Seeing the Dawn has won critical acclaim. Ricardo Demetilio, poet and critic, who has collected his verses No Certain Weather, and has written a long poem La Villa and an epic battle in Panay, and Alejandrino Giovanna, who has recently put out some of his verses in a volume called Sickle Season and a thicker volume, Poro Point. In humor, which has been neglected by most Filipino writers, there are two standouts, Alejandro Arroces Jr. and Z.V. Pedroche. The formers of Cocks and Kites, though inferior to a chapter in results Nolly, which deals with cockfighting, shows native humor at one of its best. Rose's achievement is all the more significant when one considers that he had not seen the inside of a cockpit and that he is a Borgius. Paano ba ito basahin? Bourgeois. And cockfighting is a plebeian pastime. Pedroche's race stories belong to fantasy and their humor depends more on situations than on wit. Of Filipino poetesses of the post-war period, Edith K. Chimpo and Virginia Moreno have made their mark. The latter has since 1959 threatened to collect her poems in a volume but has so far not been able to do so. In the short story, Edith K. Chimpo, Kerima Pulutan Tobira, and Hilda Cordero Fernando have consistently written significant pieces. In the essay, Carmen Guerrero Nakpil is in the front rank. Keen, witty, and subtle, she shows both in her longer essays and in her former daily newspaper columns, depth as well as breadth of vision and an elastic style that is at once charming and incisive. Of critics, there are few. Pagka ganyan guys, malabo na ang pagkasulat dito sa libro. Of critics, there are few, kaya mahirap na basahin ba? Ulit, of critics, there are fewer probably because there are few works to criticize and because of critics' job is a thankful one. Chodoro M. Locsin. May kapareho din to sa ambassador natin. Ulit. Chodoro M. Locsin, Edalberto K. Chimpo, Ricardo Dimitalia, Manuel R. Beray stopped his critical studies a few years after publishing the poetry anthology Heart of the Island in 1947, and Armando de Manalo, who is now counted among the respectable. The Filipino writers in English may not have produced great works of literature, but doubtless they have done some competent writing. The choice of language may be a happy one to a few, as in the case of N.V.M. Gonzalez and Nick Coquen. But yung mga abbreviation guys and Nick Coquen, but in general English whose nuances are too difficult for an oriental mind to master does not lend itself easy to the expression of the Filipino way of life. This problem of language as a medium of literary expression is so deceptive that many Filipino writers in English, believing in their genius, actually think this foreign language should be the national language of the Filipinos. This problem of language gains significance when one is confronted with a story in English concerning, say, a jeepney driver or a laborer. In the English story, the poor jeepney driver talks like an American with a mastery of the American idioms. Thus life is falsified and becomes a bad translation of reality. That N.V.M. Gonzalez and Nick Coquen have written competently about Filipino life in language not their own is no argument at all, for they are exceptions rather than the rule. How many Gonzalezes and Joaquins are there in the country? A Joaquin or Gonzalez does not compose the cross-section of the national literature. It is a mere cog in the great wheel of Filipino culture. Doubts have been expressed by some writers in English, and V.M. Gonzalez does not merely doubt it. He is sure of it, whether Filipino literature in English could be the national literature, In the first place, mastery of the language today is inversely proportional to its wide dissemination or less number of Filipinos understand its nuances. In the second place, the Filipino writers in English have a very limited audience, a fact which results from the preceding factor. Statistics to the contrary, notwithstanding only an insignificant number of Filipinos really know the English language. It would be interesting to make a survey of Filipinos who have read the works of Villa Joaquin Gonzalez, the Chimpos Pulutan, Tubera, and a few others, and find out how many understood the works of those writers. Offhand, it can be surmised that of the 37.2% of those alleged to have an understanding of English, only probably about 0.05% can read with understanding. Grabe naman. Konti lang yung nakakaintindi. That the English language has a sad adventure in the Philippines as elsewhere in Asia, as for instance in Singapore and Hong Kong, is shown when some radio and television announcers and commentators unconsciously or deliberately emasculate it to exhibit their personal deficiencies. Take it away, said a famous television director, and one found oneself confronted with a language that is not listed in any dictionary or linguistic atlas. One listened to the director intently to discover a clue to the mysterious language and came to the conclusion that what he actually meant to say was, "Take it away." Oh, yung take it away. Take it away pala yun. Or take an army sergeant who in a moment of ecstasy shouted, "Give way to President," and shoved the noisy people in the airport apron. A foreigner could not understand the fellow and turned to a Filipino half in consternation and half in jest. The Filipino, knowing the context of the situation, explained that the ecstatic sergeant simply meant "give way to the President." Or again, the experience of a Filipino professor of English whose student wrote in his term paper, "My father was quiet. He does not talk. He was preserved." Thereupon, the professor wrote on the margin, "Of course, how could a preserved man talk? How could a preserved man talk?" Note also the grammar. This is common even among college students to give a complete list of Filipino unconscious humor as expressed in English is to write a book on it. To read the Filipino college students' term papers is to pass through the gates of hell. It is for this reason that instructors of English in Filipino colleges look as if time and tide had been mercilessly to them. This question may be asked whether any of the major Philippine languages is sufficient developed to be a fit medium for literary expression. The answer is yes. This is evidenced by the literary output in any of the 8 major languages of the Philippines, but it is not, however, a happy medium for literary expression. If Filipino writers continue to look down upon their own languages, if they persist in thinking the foreign way in describing local scenes, in roundabout exotic terms, in delineating character, in italicized native words, and in making dialogues that are native only because the story is published in the Philippines. Manuel E. Argelia, one of the foremost local colorists in English, and Macario Pineda, the best local colorist in Tagalog, are a case in point. Compare Argelia's Midsummer with Pineda's Kung Baga sa Pamumulaklak. Both supremely beautiful in their local color, the former lacks the immediacy and intimacy of the latter. The reason is that Argelia polished as he was had to translate local objects and relations into English, and ulitin ko guys. The reason is that Argelia polished as he had to translate local objects and relations into English and translation. And the words of a Ming emperor is always a treason. On the other hand, Pineda was never confronted with the problem that beset Argelia. It is for this reason that Pineda was always faithful and fresh, while Argelia was merely dexterous. One was a natural artist, the other is a consummate craftsman. Bukas na itong The Arts. Bye everyone. God bless.